I have not found a way to comfortably pad the horns on my head so it doesn't indent into my forehead yet, so you ain't getting them this time. But we are going to talk about Loki, Season 2, Episode 2. If we're lucky, maybe I can sort that out in time for the finale. So this episode, well, not this episode, this video, this review is a little late because I actually, I had a very busy weekend and it started on Thursday. I had a lovely weekend and it was something for me, for myself, and with people I care about. So that kind of took priority over jumping on this right away. But I have now seen it and I like it more than the first episode. The first episode, I kind of said it wasn't bad, but it was the kind of okay that is either going to turn out to be, you know, the setup and groundwork that need to be laid for what came later, or is going to turn out to be the kind of early warning that the whole thing's going to be humdrum. And right now, based off second episode, it's leaning towards the former, which is good. There's a lot that I like about this. It has the feel and the rhythm much more in line with what I enjoyed a lot about the first season. The first episode felt much more like, okay, we got to establish this and deal with this. And it felt like it was shaking off the weight of both leftover story and what it needs to set up for future stories. This feels much more like, let's just get going. Let's have fun. It's really nice watching Loki be kind of villainous and like on multiple layers. There's the obvious way in which, but spoiler warning, by the way. I'm assuming you've seen the thing. But there's the obvious way he taps into his old villainy in his interrogation of Brad. Still slightly problematic because it's the kind of thing where extremely harsh interrogation techniques prove to be successful, which by implication it kind of validates the idea of torture or the equivalent of it being an effective means of interrogation. It's not. You just get people saying lies because they'll say anything to make it stop. So, like, understanding that it's playing into that trope and that trope is a problem, it's still really fun to watch him channel that again. And even before we got to that point, when he's just helping capture Brad, I love seeing him use the magic again. We haven't seen him do this much illusion, this much magic in a while. Seeing what he did with the shadows, using the illusion, like using a bit of telekinesis, it was fun. It was fun to watch, and I really enjoyed that they let him cut loose a little bit like that. The banter between him and Mobius really feels like it has gotten back into that comfortable place where I like it. It's the dynamic I enjoy between the two of them. OB is still sweet. I'm enjoying him. Brad was actually pretty good as a one-off. Antagonist is an overstatement. Brad doesn't matter that much, but he's an obstacle. Brad is the obstacle of this episode, and he's a bit of a tool, and he works. He's the kind of guy who is going to wind up these people. And he's just enough of a pain in the butt to make them really, really want to do something unpleasant to him, especially if it'll get them what they're after. So he works pretty well. We get Sylvie back, and right now she's largely just attitude. She seems to have just decided, like, I did what I intended to do. I gave people free will back. Leave me alone. I'm happy to work in a fast food joint. Which is an interesting thing for her. It kind of tracks. It kind of fits. But like right now, there isn't a strong sense of where they're going with her. Sort of catching up with her felt a bit more like, well, we have to touch base with her again. So it is open-ended enough that I'll be kind of curious to see where they go from here. So the whole thing with the mass pruning of most of the alternate timelines. Here's the thing. I suspect certain people who watch me a lot might be expecting me to go off on that. Because I've railed before about what I've dubbed as unnecessary cruelty and excess and improperly acknowledged deaths. And in this case, we are dealing with the deaths of, well, the word billions gets said. Realistically, if it's really what they depicted, then it's trillions of people die. The thing is, that's just talk. I know generally the note is show, don't tell. Don't just tell us that all these different timelines are going to show us. This is a case where I'd actually say, no, you're better off not showing us, actually, because ultimately pruning these things is, well, in theory, we'll see if it ends up actually having been necessary by the end, but in theory, they're trying to streamline things a little bit. So they're doing a mass pruning of these storylines, not storylines, of these timelines. I mean, potential storylines, I suppose. And like we're gonna narrow it down, we're gonna simplify it, and for the sake of this just going as smoothly as possible, it's probably better not to show us. Because honestly, that's where I would have complained about unnecessary cruelty. Like, I think people misunderstand me when I complain about this kind of thing. It's not just that people die in a way that is needless. It is that people who have been characterized just enough that it feels like knife twisting. That's why I went off on things like the first episode of Jodie Whittaker's tenure on Doctor Who and The Woman Who Fell to Earth, the security guard who gets killed. Before he gets killed, we have to establish he's a grandfather with a family who loves him. There is no need to establish that. All that is knife twisting. Or when I complained about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, my problem is not just that the planet of the animal hybrids, or whatever you want to call it, were all wiped out and very few people, if anybody, acknowledged it for more than about 10 seconds. That in and of itself is not my problem. My problem is that we got to know them in a way that makes the whole thing feel cruel in a way that just telling me doesn't. The destruction of Alderaan in the original Star Wars doesn't feel cruel because we don't know these people. We haven't seen them. We're told. And sometimes, controversial as this might be, sometimes telling rather than showing is the better option. And I think that's the case here too. Now, whether or not I feel it was ultimately necessary for them to eliminate all these other timelines, I think that's going to kind of depend on where they're going with the story. What it might end up being, and this will be a little bit of a disappointment, it might just be like, well, we made it look like there were hundreds, if not thousands of branching. We got to cut this down because otherwise people are going to expect too much of us. Like, it could just be that kind of housekeeping thing. And if that's all it ultimately ends up being by the time we're done with the season, that'll be a little bit of a disappointment. I'm hoping it'll be to better enable whatever story comes next, because the general, or whatever her name was, who kind of orchestrated this mass pruning of these timelines, has now been dealt with, it would appear. So she's not going to be becoming an ongoing antagonist. Her entire function seemed to be to cause this to happen. So for me, the lingering question about all this is whether this is being brought about to happen to enable something else, or if this is just being done to simplify things. In which case, my answer is, well, maybe you shouldn't have complicated as much as you did in the first place. Although, to be fair, at the time that they ended season 1, they may have either had some ideas that they dropped, or they may not have realized fully where they were going to go with the second season. Because initially when Loki was being planned, it wasn't being planned as a multi-season thing like most of the Marvel Disney Plus stuff. That's been the case. But you know, it could have been that they thought, well, it'll be infinite possibilities, and they got down and like, okay, this is too much. We need to lighten the load. Like, and I get that, but it would be a little bit disappointing, because then it becomes kind of a hand of the author thing, where like, well, this character you created only exists to simplify the potential story. And that's sort of where I feel like I see the hand of the author, and something is being done just because the creators said, okay, we need this to happen. Just figure out a way to make it happen. And like, sometimes that's writing. Sometimes that's what you need to do. But the best thing that you can do is to kind of construct it and present it in a way where it's not obvious that we're seeing the plot mechanics at work. And again, I don't know if that's the case or not. It'll depend on what stories kind of follow on from this. We'll see. But ultimately, while I've kind of talked in like sort of terms for a lot of this, I do like this more because it captures the feel and the fun of what I really liked about the first season of Loki. We've got that with Loki himself, with him and Morbius. The stuff with Brad, I think, is actually quite enjoyable. I don't expect him to show up in later episodes this season, but if he does, I won't complain. He's kind of fun. And yeah, this, I just feel a little bit better. after this episode versus the first one. And after the first one, I didn't feel bad. I just kind of felt like, okay. Here I'm like, it was like, this is the trajectory. First episode was okay. This one was like, okay. So we're not at peak yet, but we're on a good trajectory. We'll see if that holds as we go forward with future episodes. So what did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are on Loki episode 2, Breaking Brad. That pun's terrible. Or it's perfect. I don't know. Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills. Enables me to do this as my living. Like, share, subscribe also help. Don't worry too much about any of that, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here so you can come on back next time you need a break. Time to thank some Patreon backers, and in the spirit of October, I'd like to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Goddess Alita, Turok, The Thing That Goes Doink in the Anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabilax the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, and Rosalind Bennett. Thank you for your assistance. I don't know, I might try theming the shoutouts in the future. I don't know, we'll see. Thank you.